And if we can do that effectively and to assess that this decision I'm about to make, this emotional state I'm in, doesn't or does align with those values and goals and decision making traps of biases like anchoring, overconfidence, status quo, loss aversion. I mean, we don't need to have that library at play, but what we do need to know are there things right now that we're experiencing that we might be making an assumption on? And if we are, we'll want to identify that. And that's part of reflect. That R, the second step in the 4 Rs, is such a critical one because it sets up the best R, in my opinion, of reframe. Reframe allows us to be able to shift our mindset. And it is such an important step because it allows us to change change the decision. So if we're saying that this emotional state that I'm in is the wrong decision or not the most optimal emotional state for me to be in right now to make this decision, and these are my values of integrity, family, excellence, health, and achievement, and I might be making some assumptions about what the data is saying, I'm going to make a different choice. I'm going to change my mind. So if I can change my mind, I'm going to be making a better choice. And there's so many different applications for this, whether your listeners are in a leadership position, whether they are individual contributors, whether they are at home helping their grandkids. It's an important decision because if we can operate with that mindset of helping put it into practice, I mean, we're only going to be that much better at influencing others, which can help us live in alignment more.
So reframing, yeah, I agree, Ryan. I think it's the best R. It's also it's undercover the most difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like it's the easiest one. Oh, just reframe it. Just make this problem into something else. It almost sounds like I'm just going to pretend like I'm not pissed off and I'm actually thrilled that this bad thing happened to me or whatever it is. To reframe almost seems like it's just as easy as saying
see this bad thing is a good thing, right?
Yeah, and it's like the Jocko Willink everything bad is good idea. Anything you break your leg, good. Now you get to bench press more.
Right.
It's like that sounds so simple and silly, but without contemplative thought and without adhering to the first two steps, without recognizing and reflecting adequately, I'm never going to reframe successfully. And what I noticed about myself anyway is I get to that position where I have the reframe, or I have the opportunity to reframe, and even if I haven't arrived at that moment in a healthy way, then I just discount it. I have to bullshit. Not going to reframe right now.
Well, and it's one of those. It's such a important point to make that in reframing, context matters. So one of the things that you alluded to, Sanger, is that one of the, especially that's drilled into us at an early age is failure. And how do you reframe failure? There's so many different stories out there. Yeah. You can go outside, go to a library, go to Amazon, pick a book, and some book is going to tell you about how the founder of a company overcame failure. And that's just a reframing exercise.
Yeah.
And it takes a tremendous amount of energy to do that. And it shouldn't go unnoticed, because back to our biases, those biases are there for a reason. And they're there because it is less energetic from a complete biochemistry point of view. It is less energetic to go through the bias network than it is to actually think logically, think cognitively. It takes a tremendous amount of energy for our brain to engage our prefrontal cortex, which is why we relegate a lot of our decision-making to our habits. And those are the habits that have worked for us. And it's gotten to us where we are today. we've developed those habits, and they've been so successful for us that we lean on them constantly. And what will happen is that we'll apply those habits in situations that might not be appropriate, and we'll experience some form of failure. And it's, how do we reframe it, take the knowledge out of failure that we can, and respond in a way that's consistent with who we want to be. And I think it's that other R, the respond R, that also, it's because it's involved in action, and because it's involved in doing something, it's sometimes overlooked. But the key part of it is that with who I want to be, with consistent with my values. So if I'm experiencing a bad day, I'm going to want to I don't want to just spin it. I don't want to spin it to something that's, Joe, yeah, Ryan, this, but it's over now. You get to have a different day. It doesn't take into a full account of what occurred. So if we can take into a full account of what occurred, but respond in a way that, one of my values is integrity. So I want to honor my own experience, be empathetic for myself, and then respond in the way that's most consistent with me. And that would be trying to take into account the bad day, understand what happened, and learn from it, then completely dismiss the experience as bad.
Sure. The idea of falling back on our habits being easier is, I think that it's a lot easier to understand when you think about it in a physical way, right? I think conceptually most people would agree at first glance upon first hearing that statement. Oh yeah, it's easier to fall in our habits because we've all had bad habits that we fall back on. I used to bite my nails, tried to stop biting my nails, and I end up biting my nails again, whatever it is. I've been training for triathlons recently. I'm working up to doing a full length Ironman later this year. And so I've been trying to listen to a lot of the, really successful athletes in that sport. And there's this guy named Lionel Sanders, who's from Canada, done a lot of, I think he won Ironman World Championships a couple years ago. He's really good, but he's got a lot of content on YouTube. And I was watching this video of him, and his early morning bike ride on the stationary bike was only like an hour. And they were talking about that. Like, hey man, you're not just training for an Ironman, you're training to win an Ironman. How are you only going to work out for an hour? He goes, you know why a lot of these people focus on distance? A lot of athletes focus on distance. They go ride 100 miles or they go run 20 miles, whatever it is. They focus on distance instead of a tempo workout, where you're focused on getting your heart rate high and then getting it back low again and then getting it back high again. They do that. They focus on distance, he said, because it's easy. And at first I heard that. I was like, no, it's not. It's way harder it's way harder to ride 100 miles than it is to ride your bike for an hour. But it's not, because you know how to ride a bike, right? If you've been riding your bike, you know how to ride a bike, and you just fall on that habit for 6 hours. And it's a lot easier to habitually ride your bike for 6 hours than it is to change.
Yeah,
and
tempo runs are way harder than long distance stuff.
Way harder. It's a shorter amount of time, but it's not just physically harder, it's mentally harder too. I'll go do a tempo run or a tempo ride on the bike, and it's oftentimes the hardest part is to just think about when I'm going to change gears, not even actually changing gears. Just go, okay, so it's been 5 minutes and I've got to do 3 minutes of hard effort every 10 minutes. So that means I've got to do, and I just drive myself crazy thinking about it. So that totally makes sense, that to avoid those habits requires a great deal of mental energy.
I think conserving the mental energy is key. If you've ever been in a, you go to those conferences and, things like that, and I'll come back and I'm just exhausted at the end of the day. And, somebody said, well, you're just sitting there. Like, yeah, but if you're engaged, your brain consumes so much energy when you're concentrating. I think these heuristics or these rules of thumb are put in place by nature to give us that break and conserve energy. So if I can fall on my habits and go, oh, that's the way it is, and this is this, and this is the way we always did it, so this is the way we'll do it, or create these biases. It's there in our self-defense to conserve energy. So, but the risk is leaning on them too much and not doing that critical thinking, so that you're not having a good decision-making framework in some time. But it's hard to recognize when the best time to do one or the other is.
The same reason stereotypes exist, right? We have stereotypes for whole genders and whole races of people, because it's evolutionarily, it's a lot easier for us to just make a quick judgment than to assess someone completely and totally as an individual, because there's too many of them. There's too many people. And we recognize that as a society. All stereotypes are bad. Behavioral cognitive biases are just stereotypes of thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
There's up here in the Midwest, as I mentioned, I'm from Connecticut. So here in Minneapolis, the first question I got, I don't know if it's the same is true in Texas for you guys, but when I first got here, people are like, you don't look like you're from here. I'm Italian. I'm Italian and Portuguese. So, which is like not a combo here in, Nordic land, where people are more Scandinavian than they are not. But the second comment I would get would be, what high school did you go to?
Yeah.
And it's a weird, I would never have thought to ask that question.
No, because then they can pigeonhole you.
You got it. And and then it's a way to anchor, again, back to a bias. It's a way to anchor you and understand what type of person you are based on the other people they know. Yeah. So if I said I was from Edina, people would understand what that meant versus someone from Woodbury or Champlain Park. Right. So it's such and because I wasn't able to answer that question, people didn't know how to relate.
They had a tough time dealing with it. It was the same reason we asked people, so what do you do? Right? Because if you tell me you're, a banker, then okay, I can compartmentalize that. If you tell me you're electrician, I can compartmentalize that. You tell me you're an astronaut, I can compartmentalize that. Mm-hmm. So I have this framework of what I think about you. This image that I come up with, this backstory that I immediately come up with, that helps me sort of figure you out, I guess. Right. But we do that. So it's tough to figure out people who are retired. So, what do you do? Well, I'm retired. Well, then you ask, well, what did you do?
Yeah.
What did you do before that? That doesn't help me.
I still need to make all of these assumptions.
Right. I still have to pigeonhole you. I try not to do that, but it's you can't help it.
No, it's hard. It's hard to avoid it. It's hard to avoid it. In Texas, I get that, that's a question that happens here all the time. I ask it for a completely different reason, probably also the normal reason, but I ask it because a lot of people, and we live in Fort Worth, right? And it's a big city. I'm always offended when people say they haven't heard of Fort Worth. We're the 13th largest city in the country. We need some respect. But a lot of people, I say, like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Fort Worth. Okay, what high school did you go to? And they name some high school, 30 miles away. I said, you liar, you fraud. You're not from Fort Worth. You're not in the club. But that's just because I'm rude. And
I'm glad I didn't say that you guys are from Dallas then.
Oh,
thank you. We would have ended the call, Ryan. That's the most insulting thing you could say.
I actually saw a speaker get booed one time. He was in Fort Worth. It was a booing in good spirits, but he said, well, anytime I'm here in Dallas, I talk to, and everybody went, whoa, I don't know if they have that same kind of rivalry between Minneapolis and St. Paul, but that happens.
You need a passport to go to St. Paul. So,
okay.
I like St. Paul just for that. They get overlooked. I feel like I relate to those people a little bit. I feel like we have something in common. They're out there. They're probably doing great things. Something happens in St. Paul, and my newsman's going to say it was Minneapolis.
Yeah.
is disrespecting all those hundreds of thousands of hardworking men and women.
Funny.
Well, listen.